Hello fellow Earthlings and those checking in from beyond. You have landed in the corner of YouTube where I talk about things that I have learned in my introductory psychology class. In this video I'll be going over everything we learned about consciousness. I hope you're ready. Take a deep breath and get ready to learn more introductory psychology. Well, if we're going to study consciousness, the best way to start would be to define it. Consciousness is a big word with a lot of heavy implications, but I think most simply it can be understood as the sensory awareness of the external world, as well as our internal awareness of our thoughts and feelings and sense of self. Alright, next we're going to talk about a few terms that have their roots in Freudian psychology, preconscious and unconscious, as well as suppression and repression. Now, I think to understand these terms, it is best to think of consciousness simply as awareness. Okay, so if consciousness means awareness, what do these things mean here? Well, first we'll start with preconscious. Preconscious is something that is in your mind but is not immediately in your realm of awareness. It's kind of in the back burner, so to speak. While suppression is the deliberate act of taking a thought or feeling and kind of pushing it out of your immediate awareness, out of your immediate consciousness, and putting it sort of into the back of your mind. And an easy example to help understand these is, let's say it's Thursday night and you're studying for an exam that is Friday morning. And after you take the exam on Friday night, you're going to be going to a party. Well, on Thursday night when you're studying for this exam, you don't want to be thinking about that party that's on Friday night, so you can suppress those thoughts about the party and the excited feelings you have, and when you suppress them, you're putting it back into your preconscious, into the, into the back of your mind. But at will, you can bring those thoughts out of your preconscious. That's important. You're able to draw them out of your preconscious at will. Now, unconscious and repression is a little bit different. Unconscious means you have thoughts and feelings that are in the back of your mind, so to speak, but you might not even know they're there, and you're not even able to pull them out. With preconscious, thinking about the party, you can suppress it and put those thoughts into your preconscious, but you can think about the party again and bring those thoughts out. If something is in your unconscious, you can't do that because you might not even know they're there. Now, the way some things get into the unconscious is through a process that's known as repression. This is the unconscious ejection of thoughts and feelings and memories that are, anxiety-inducing. Think of like a traumatic experience from your childhood, for example. If you have a traumatic childhood experience, you can repress that and throw it into the unconscious part of your mind, where you might not remember this experience because it's traumatic and anxiety-inducing, and you won't be able to pull that out of your head. Now, there are some schools of thought that believe things like hypnosis can bring things out of your unconscious, but I'm not really qualified to speak too much on that one, so we'll just leave it at preconscious is thoughts that you can draw out of your mind and into your immediate awareness, while unconscious are the thoughts that you cannot bring into your immediate awareness. Now, the next thing we learned about consciousness is that there are altered states of consciousness that we can achieve, and so we'll talk about the 3 different ways that we learned that you can alter your consciousness. And the first one, very easy, sleep. Everybody knows what sleep is. Sleep is an altered state of consciousness. It's when you go from your conscious waking state into an unconscious state where you're no longer aware of those external surroundings. And sleep can be measured by things like brain waves. Now, what is a brain wave? That sounds rad as hell. Now, brain waves are essentially little electrical voltages that get discharged in the brain, and they oscillate up and down like little waves. Now, sleep has 5 different sleep cycles, and we're not going to spend too much time talking about all of those because this is just in introductory psychology class, but it might be good to know that stages 3 and 4 of our sleep cycles are considered the deepest stages of sleep when it's most difficult to wake us up, while stage 5 is what's known as REM sleep. It stands for rapid eye movement sleep because in this 5th stage, our eyes are actually darting back and forth really quick underneath our eyelids. Now, a cool thing to know about REM sleep is this is the period of sleep where we actually dream. And while we're dreaming, this is known as the paradoxical sleep period because our bodies are actually paralyzed, which prevents us from acting out the dreams that we have, thankfully. Now, one disorder that we learned about related to REM sleep is REM behavior disorder. And this is essentially when our body is no longer paralyzed during this period where we dream, and it allows us to act out some of the dreams that we have. People who have REM behavior disorder are often sleepwalking, and people who sleepwalk don't even realize that they are sleepwalking because they're asleep, they're not conscious, they're not aware of what's going on. And if you wake them up while they're sleepwalking, they're going to be very startled and very confused. Alright, we'll talk about a couple more sleep disorders that we learned about before moving on to the next state of altered consciousness. And we'll start with sleep apnea. Sleep apnea is a sleep disorder where you wake up multiple times throughout the night because your body actually stops breathing. People who have sleep apnea often don't even realize that they are waking up constantly throughout the night. I actually had sleep apnea back in the day, and I had a sleep study done, and the doctors discovered that I was waking up every minute and 15 seconds because I would stop breathing. And I had no idea. All I knew was that I was very tired in the morning, no matter how much I slept. And they found out that I stopped breathing during the night because my tonsils were swollen, and it was blocking 90% of my airway. Well, once they took my tonsils and uvula out, it cleared up my airway, and my sleep apnea went away. Now, it can be a little bit more complex for other people because there may be some neurological factors at play that cause them to stop breathing. But either way, sleep apnea is not a fun thing to have. Up next, we have narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is characterized by excessive sleepiness throughout the day. Now, a lot of people think of narcolepsy as this sleep disorder that causes people to fall asleep randomly throughout the day and they have no control over it, they can just sort of pass out. And that can happen. It's called cataplexy, which is the total loss of muscle tone and muscle control. But more commonly, narcolepsy is really just when people go to sleep, they're not going through the normal 5 stages of sleep. You know, we didn't talk about all the 5 stages, but I said 3 and 4 are the deepest parts of sleep. They're very restful and restorative. But people who have narcolepsy go straight into the REM sleep, straight into the dreaming state. It is not the most restful and restorative sleep cycle that we have. So people who have narcolepsy may sleep just as much during the night as anybody else, but because they're not going through the normal cycles, they're not going through the normal periods of sleep, they're not getting a restful and restorative night's sleep like everybody else, and that is why they're so tired throughout the day. Now, I know I said that we'll talk about a couple more sleep disorders, then move on to the next altered state of consciousness, but wouldn't it be crazy if we talked about sleep and did not even mention dreams? What exactly is a dream, and why are they so cool? Well, dreams at the most basic level are caused from the pons, the little structure in our brain that we talked about in one of our previous videos, and from a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine. Now, this neurotransmitter, acetylcholine, and the pons stimulate the cerebral cortex, which then synthesizes this stimulation and causes us to form the dreams that we have. Now, there are a lot of schools of thought as to what dreams may mean. It's generally accepted that dreams often take memories and experiences that we've had throughout the day and incorporate them into our dreams. There are some schools of thought that believe dreams are a representation of our unconscious desires. There might be things that we want or crave and don't even know about, and those can kind of come out in our dreams. I happen to believe that dreams are a manifestation of the emotions that we're experiencing throughout the day or during a particular time in our life. The second altered state of consciousness we learned about is meditation. Our class defined meditation as focusing your consciousness to alter the relationship between yourself and the world around you. Now, certain types of meditation, like mindfulness meditation, are all about focusing your attention on the present moment and becoming very aware of your thoughts and feelings in this particular moment instead of worrying about things that may be happening in the future. Now, if you focus all of your attention on the present moment and how you're feeling, you're actually increasing your awareness of yourself. And if you increase the awareness of yourself, this can help you with any number of things. It can help with procrastination, it can help with addiction, and it can help you be a more loving and caring human being. One more concept that's very similar to meditation is known as biofeedback training. This is a practice where you focus your attention on physiological aspects of the body, such as your heart rate. If your heart rate is beating very fast, you can use biofeedback training to focus on your heart rate and trying to lower it. And you can actually accomplish this through just the power of your mind. You can lower your heart rate just by focusing on it. This can be very helpful for managing things like stress and anxiety, and can be used by athletes to help with their cool-down periods. The third way to alter your consciousness that we learned about is drugs. Now, we'll be talking specifically about psychoactive substances today, which are basically just drugs that have psychological effects such as stimulation or distortion of your perception. Now, there are three different psychoactive substances that we learned about: depressants, stimulants, and hallucinogens, and we'll talk a little bit about each one and how it affects you. We'll start with depressants. Depressants are things like barbiturates, opiates, and alcohol is actually a depressant. And basically these depress your nervous system and they can impair your motor control, concentration, things like that. Up next is stimulants. These are things like caffeine, amphetamines, nicotine is a stimulant, and these all just rev up your nervous system and can actually help with concentration a little bit. But if used and abused in the long term, they can cause loss of appetite, sleep disorders, and many more problems. Last but not least, we have hallucinogens. Hallucinogens are substances that can cause hallucinations where you see or hear things that aren't really there. They can also cause a myriad of other side effects like euphoria, altered sense of time, and just feeling really groovy. Drugs that are hallucinogens are things like marijuana, LSD, peyotes, magic mushrooms, and more. Now, if we're going to be talking about drugs, we have to talk about the dangers of drugs as well. Substance use disorder is something that can happen through repeated long-term use of a drug. It is characterized by the loss of control over your ability to use or not use the drug. You may crave it when you're not using it. You may build your life around using it, plan your social activities around using this drug. You may wake up in the morning and say, at night, I'm not going to use this substance, but by the time the evening rolls around, you end up using it anyways. Next, we'll talk a little bit about addiction, which is very similar to substance use disorder. Addiction is the compulsive use of a drug despite the negative consequences it may cause at work, at home, in your social life, things of that nature. Now, a drug can be physically addicting where your body actually physically needs it to survive. An example of this would be severe alcohol addiction. If you have alcohol addiction to a certain degree, you will actually die if you try to stop cold turkey, meaning you just completely cut it off. And if this is the case, there are very specific procedures and things that you have to do to kick that alcohol addiction. You gotta be very careful with that. There can also be physiological addictions where your mind tricks you into believing that you need the drug to function. Now, one more note about addiction is some people are genetically predisposed to be more likely to develop an addiction later in their life. For example, if you have a parent who is an alcoholic, you are more likely to become an alcoholic later on. Now, this doesn't mean if you have a parent who's an alcoholic, you will become an alcoholic. It's just something that you should be mindful of because you may have a genetic trait that means you're more likely to develop an addiction, so you just have to be careful. There's a couple more terms we're going to learn about related to addiction: tolerance and withdrawal. Tolerance can be developed through long-term use of a drug or through addiction, and it is essentially your body becomes used to the effects of a drug over time, so you end up having to use more and more of that drug to get the high that you used to have. Up next is withdrawal. Withdrawal can be the physical or psychological effects that happen when you stop using a drug. This can present in the form of anxiety, in very intense cravings to use a drug. In alcohol withdrawal, it can look like tremors. That's a physical withdrawal symptom. But there can be a whole lot of other symptoms that happen as a result of withdrawal. Well, that's about all we learned on consciousness this week. Our next videos will be going over behavior and memory. I'm particularly excited to learn how memory works, as our first midterm for this class is coming up. But before I go, I want to clear up a common misconception about meditation. A lot of people seem to think that meditation is all about clearing your mind and just focusing on your breathing. Well, if you have a lot of racing thoughts and a very active mind, it can be very frustrating if you're trying to clear your head and all of these thoughts keep popping up. Try instead to go outside and start focusing on your breathing, but when a thought comes in, don't try to fight it, don't try to push it away. Just let the thought be. Let it work its course and just be aware of it. And when that thought has worked its course and has gone away, try to turn your attention back on your breathing. And when a new thought pops up, just be aware of that thought and let it run its course. Meditation doesn't have to produce a clear mind. It is much easier to produce an aware mind. And if you have an aware mind, you can be a lot more aware of how you can be a better version of yourself. Until next week, I'll see you guys around.